Hi everyone, thanks for checking out our project. We did our study on generalizing mands and reducing aggression using PECS and sign language. Teaching language and verbal skills to people with disabilities, especially individuals with autism, has always been a difficult task. Historically, treatments such as psychoanalysis, vitamin therapy, facilitated communication, and sensory integration have been ineffective in teaching individuals with autism how to speak and communicate. With the advent of Skinner's book, Verbal Behavior, behavior analysis was able to find a treatment that would enable individuals with autism the ability to learn speech. Ivar Lovaas and his students began using behavior analysis to target specific verbal behaviors and to reinforce their occurrences. One basic form of communication Skinner outlined in his book were mands. Mands are requests for preferred items or activities and are largely controlled by establishing operations for the preferred item or activity. Mands are very critical for learning language because they serve as one of the most basic and naturally reinforcing verbal behaviors, especially to children with autism, since the reinforcement typically given to mands are non-social reinforcers. Teaching an individual to mand for something appropriately has the potential to reduce problem behaviors, aberrant speech, or immature mands such as pulling an adult or pointing. Research has also shown that there are carryovers from mand training that can transfer to tax and other verbal skills. Teaching an individual to mand vocally sometimes is more time-consuming and difficult to teach than an alternative method. One popular alternative method is the Picture Exchange Communication System, otherwise known as PECS. Instead of manding vocally, an individual with autism can use a PECS book to take a picture and exchange it for a preferred item. Another popular alternative method is American Sign Language. Research indicates that learning these alternative systems of communication not only serve as proxies for vocal communication, but can also increase other communication behaviors such as initiating social interactions, expanding a vocabulary, and increasing receptive skills. There are two main studies that compared the efficacy of using PECS and sign language to teach manding. The first one we're going to look at is by Matt Tinsani from 2004. He was a researcher at the University of Nevada, Reno. In Tinsani's study, he used an alternating treatment design with a best treatment phase. And in addition to comparing PECS and sign language, he examined pre-existing imitation skills to see if sign language would be acquired faster than PECS would in individuals who had high imitation skills. His hypothesis was right, and the individual in his study that had higher imitation skills was able to acquire sign at a faster rate than PECS. As you all know, Rehfeldt and Chambers also conducted a similar study in 2003. They too used an alternating treatment design, and they ended their experiment using generalization probes to see if the behavior generalized at a later date. They examined 4 adults with developmental disabilities and found that PECS was acquired at a faster rate and generated more independent mands than sign language did. They hypothesized that the reason for this was because PECS was an easier response topography than sign language, where for PECS you would just pick up one picture and hand it, and that's all you do. For sign you would have to recall several unique topographies to communicate a mand. One common limitation in teaching mands is generalization to out-of-training contexts. Mands would occur under certain circumstances, but when it came to actually producing mands in more general home environments, it was very difficult to replicate that. One way researchers combated this trend was to increase the presence of PECS binders to serve as an SD in a more generalized environment. Primarily, researchers also focused on manipulating the establishing operations of reinforcers so that they may maintain deprivation and encourage generalized responding. So, based on all the previous research, our current study sought to fulfill three purposes. The first purpose was to directly compare the effects of PACS training and the training of sign language on independent manding behavior. The second purpose was to compare the effects of PACS and sign language on reducing aggressive behavior as it made an alternative communication. And lastly, we wanted to see if independent manding behavior could generalize to more natural settings and could maintain across time.
So for our study, we had 3 participants. We had Tom, who was a 7-year-old male whose IQ was 35 and was diagnosed with having severe autism and intellectual disability. He had no verbal repertoire. Josh was a 6-year-old male with an IQ of 45. He had been diagnosed with moderate autism and intellectual disability, and he also had no verbal repertoire. Our last participant was a 6-year-old female named Tammy. She had an IQ of 50 and also had severe autism and moderate intellectual disability. She, however, had a limited verbal repertoire. Materials used in the study included their textbook, video cameras, and reinforcers, which included drinks, food items, and toys. The study was conducted in a small Midwest American school for individuals with autism spectrum disorder. All the sessions were conducted at the school, with training sessions occurring in the library, which were implemented by the researchers. Intervention sessions and generalization probes were recorded in the classrooms, and the intervention sessions were implemented by the teachers. In our study, the independent variables were PECS and sign language training in the classroom. The dependent variables were the frequency per session of correct independent mands and the occurrences of aggressive behavior. Inter-observer agreement was collected by the researchers using the video cameras. IOA was calculated using the total count agreement for 50% of the sessions. The researchers achieved 96% agreement. Procedural reliability was also gathered using video recordings of the classroom. We assessed the social validity of our experiments through surveys that were sent to the parents. For our experiment, we used the alternating treatments design. Our baseline consisted of 3 sessions in which we recorded either mands or aggression, and in the baseline condition, no reinforcement was available. Following baseline, we had training sessions that were conducted in the library with researchers. This took place over a 3-week period and occurred 3 times a week at 1 hour each. During the 1-hour training sessions, PECS was trained for 30 minutes, and then sign language was trained for 30 minutes. During training, correct manding was reinforced and a prompting process was used. Following training, we implemented the intervention, which we called the post-training session. Post-training consisted of 10 sessions that continued over a 3-week period. The treatments, PECS, and sign language were alternated and counterbalanced throughout the sessions. Throughout the sessions, the number of mands and number of aggressive behaviors were recorded. Preferred items were visible but out of reach. Independent mands were reinforced with 20 seconds of access to the requested item. Incorrect mands or aggressive behavior were followed by the teacher prompting procedure. Prompted mands were reinforced but not counted. After the post-training session, a best treatment phase was implemented. The best treatment phase was the same as post-training, but only the most effective treatment method. remained. We recorded data in the best treatment phase for 3 sessions over a 1-week period. We also gathered data for 2 generalization probes that were recorded 2 weeks after the last session of the best treatment phase. For all 3 of our participants, the frequency of appropriate manding increased from baseline, and the frequency of aggressive behavior was reduced from baseline. For Tom and Josh, PECS was shown to be the most effective treatment, and our data suggests that their mending generalized. For Tammy, sign language was the most effective treatment, and her mending also generalized. Here we have a graph showing Tom's mending with PECS and sign. During baseline, Tom's frequency of mending was at 0. Following training, the frequency of mending emitted by Tom increased, with PECS being the most effective treatment. His frequency of correct mending increased even in the best treatment phase. The generalization probes that were conducted indicated that his mending generalized to other settings. This graph displays the frequency of Tom's aggressive behavior. During baseline, Tom exhibited a high frequency of aggressive behavior. Following the introduction of our intervention, Tom's aggressive behavior decreased for both the PECS and sign language conditions. PECS was shown to reduce Tom's aggressive behavior the most. This figure shows Tammy's frequency of mending with PECS and sign language. During baseline, Tammy emitted 0 correct mendings. During the post-training intervention, Tammy's frequency of mending increased for both the PECS and sign language condition. For Tammy, sign language was shown to be the most effective treatment. This graph shows the frequency of Tammy's aggressive behavior. In baseline, there was a high frequency of this behavior. The interventions were shown to be an effective way of reducing Tammy's aggressive behavior, with sign language being the most effective.
So in conclusion, the current study demonstrated the effectiveness of man training in increasing independent mans and reducing aggressive behavior. For 2 of the 3 participants, PECS was the more effective treatment. The 3rd participant responded better to the sign language intervention. Some limitations to our study was the lack of reinforcer variety. We used the same 4 stimuli over the course of the intervention. Also, the same teacher and setting was used for the generalization instead of transferring the generalization to a home environment. And lastly, because the establishing operations were not under the control of the researchers at all times, there may have been some confounds in their execution. Thank you so much for listening to our presentation. Have a great one.